My name is Aaron Whitlock. I'm 32 years old. And the night my parents humiliated me in front of my 11-year-old son is the night everything finally broke. It happened at a Sunday dinner that was supposed to be ordinary. Pot roast cooling on the table, plates untouched. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He looked straight at me and said flat and measured, "You can move to the basement, or you and the boy can be out by Friday." The room went quiet. Then my brother laughed. His wife didn't laugh, she smiled. The kind of smile that comes when someone knows a decision has already been made. I felt my son stiffen beside me. His hand tightened around his fork. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Dad, did we do something wrong?" That question landed harder than the ultimatum. What they didn't say, what they assumed I wouldn't challenge, was that the house I was being pushed out of was the same house I had been holding together for years. And what I didn't know yet was that paperwork had already been signed, money already moved, and my son's stability already gambled away. A few weeks later, my phone rang in the middle of the night. There were sirens in the background. Someone was crying. And for the first time, the people who erased us were begging me to come back. Before we continue, take a moment to check the time where you're watching from. And tell me your city in the comments. Stories travel farther than we think. And if this story resonates, consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps these quiet stories reach the people who need them most. The decision to move back into my parents' house didn't come from nostalgia. It came from paperwork. The divorce finalized in early March, the kind of gray month where winter refuses to let go. The custody agreement was clear, clean, and unforgiving in its neutrality. Leo would spend weekdays with me, weekends alternating. Stability was the word the mediator used most often. School continuity, predictable routines, minimal disruption. I nodded through it all, knowing stability wasn't something you could sign into existence. At the time, my parents' house seemed like the least damaging option. Same school district, same bus route. A familiar neighborhood where Leo already knew which sidewalks cracked and which trees dropped leaves too early in the fall. I told myself it would be temporary, just long enough to recalibrate, just long enough to get my feet back under me. What I walked into was not a soft landing. The house looked the same on the surface, but it sounded different. The furnace kicked on too often. The roof ticked when it rained. There was a constant low hum of things barely holding together. Within a week, I found unopened mail stacked in a drawer. Tax notices, late utility warnings, a letter from the county printed in red ink. My father waved it off when I asked. "We'll get to it." They hadn't. The roof had been leaking for over a year. The property taxes were 2 quarters behind. The electric company had sent a final notice I intercepted before Leo could see it. My mother kept apologizing for small things, empty pantry shelves, flickering lights, as if inconvenience was the problem, not collapse. I didn't announce what I was doing. I just started fixing things. I supplemented the mortgage, quietly routing payments from my account so the bank wouldn't escalate. I paid a contractor to patch the roof before spring storms rolled in. I cleared the utility arrears in one transfer, then set up automatic payments so no one would have to talk about it again. Every receipt went into a folder I never showed anyone. During the day, I worked my full schedule, project timelines, site inspections, coordination calls that blurred together. At night, after Leo fell asleep, I crawled into the attic to check insulation, replaced rotting boards in the basement, sealed windows that hadn't closed properly in years. My weekends became maintenance cycles. Hardware store runs, patch jobs, temporary solutions meant to last just a little longer. No one asked me to do it. No one thanked me either. My parents treated it like weather, something that happened around them without explanation. My father nodded when I mentioned repairs, already distracted by something my brother had said earlier that day. My mother said, "You shouldn't have, but never told me to stop." Leo adjusted faster than I did. He took the smaller bedroom without complaint. did his homework at the kitchen table while I ran numbers in my head, recalculating budgets, timelines, exit plans. Sometimes he'd look up and ask when we'd have our own place again. I'd tell him soon. I believed it, at least in theory. But there was a moment late one night sitting on the basement steps with my back against the wall when the truth settled in. I hadn't moved back for comfort. I hadn't moved back for family. I had moved back because if I didn't, the whole structure, financial, emotional, practical, was going to give way. And someone had to stand underneath it long enough to keep it from collapsing on a child who didn't ask to be part of any of this. That realization didn't make me angry. Not yet. It just made everything very clear. Derek had always been introduced the same way. "This is Derek," my father would say, his voice lifting just a little. "He's a dreamer." It was never meant as a warning. In our house, dreaming was treated like a virtue in itself, separate from results, immune to consequence. Derek was 3 years younger than me, loud where I was measured, confident in the way people are when they've never had to carry the weight of their own mistakes for very long. By the time I moved back, he was already on his third reinvention. The first had been a food delivery startup, an app that promised faster routes and better margins, though Derek couldn't explain how it differed from the dozen others already failing. My parents had given him seed money. When it folded 6 months later, my father said the timing was wrong. The market wasn't ready. Derek just needed better partners. Then came crypto consulting. Derek didn't invest exactly. He advised. He talked about decentralized futures and early adoption like he'd been born fluent in risk. Clients never materialized, but excuses did. The market shifted. Regulations tightened. People were too scared to commit. Each failure was met with sympathy, not scrutiny. My parents never asked where the money went. They never asked why Derek always needed more time, more trust, more backing. They talked about his ambition the way some families talk about illness, something unfortunate, but blameless, something you support until it passes. Meanwhile, I paid the electric bill. I noticed the pattern in small moments. The way my father leaned forward when Derek talked, eyes bright, hands folded like he was listening to a sermon. The way my mother repeated Derek's ideas to church friends, polishing them as she spoke, as if confidence could substitute for proof. When I mentioned covering the roof repair, the room barely paused. "That's good," my father said, already turning back to Derek. "Now tell me about the new model you were thinking about." Even Leo began to fade into the background. He learned to make himself quiet when Derek was around. Sat on the floor with his homework while conversations floated above him, numbers and plans he wasn't part of. No one asked how school was going. No one noticed when he started eating faster, as if he were worried time at the table was something he had to earn. Once Derek borrowed my car without asking, said he needed it for a meeting. When I objected, my father waved me off. "It's just for the day. He's trying to build something." I wondered what exactly I was building. There were nights when Leo was asleep and the house was quiet, except for the refrigerator cycling on and off, when I'd sit with my laptop open, spreadsheets glowing in the dark. I tracked expenses, repairs, transfers, the silent infrastructure of a household that functioned because someone made it function. No one called that dreaming. At dinner, praise skipped me entirely. It moved from my parents to Derek and back again, looping like a closed circuit. When I spoke, it was to clarify logistics. When Derek spoke, it was to imagine futures. Once after Derek left the room, my mother said he just needs one good break. I didn't ask what that made me. Leo noticed more than I wanted him to. One night, brushing his teeth, he asked why Uncle Derek didn't have a job, but still got to talk so much at dinner. I told him different people contributed in different ways. The answer tasted thin even as I said it. Later, lying awake in my childhood room, staring at a ceiling I'd helped patch, the question finally formed in my mind, not angry, just sharp. When did providing stop counting as belonging? I didn't resent Derek for dreaming, not really. I resented the way dreams were allowed to replace responsibility, the way effort without spectacle became invisible. I resented that my son was learning quietly that usefulness didn't guarantee protection. That realization settled slowly, like dust you don't see, until the light shifts. and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Sloane entered our lives the way certain people do, without noise but with immediate gravity. Derek brought her to the house one evening, unannounced. She stepped through the door like she already belonged there. Heels clicking softly on the hardwood posture, straight expression, calm and practiced. She wore neutral colors, nothing flashy, but everything about her looked intentional. Even the way she shook my parents' hands felt rehearsed, as if she'd done it many times before in rooms that mattered. "This is Sloane," Derek said, beaming. "She works in financial consulting." That phrase landed differently than the others he'd used before. My father straightened in his chair. My mother smiled with relief, like something had finally balanced out. Sloane spoke easily, about markets, about protecting long-term assets, about strategies that sounded sophisticated without ever becoming specific. She used phrases like asset optimization and risk exposure the way some people use small talk, confidently, casually, as if numbers bent to her will. I asked where she'd studied. She smiled. A mix of places. It wasn't an answer exactly, but no one pressed. Within weeks, she and my father were spending time alone at the kitchen table, after dinner papers spread out between them. Sloane would point at documents, lowering her voice. My father nodded along, brow furrowed, looking both worried and impressed. When I walked in, they'd shift topics, fold things away. "Just boring stuff," my father would say. "You don't need to worry about it." But worry has a way of arriving before permission. The first red flag was urgency. Everything Sloane discussed came with a deadline, a window that was closing, an opportunity that wouldn't wait. She spoke in pressure language now, or never before rates change while conditions are still favorable. It left little room for reflection. The second was paperwork. There was always something new to sign, something revised, something she'd just need initialed. My father trusted her enough not to read closely. My mother trusted my father. Derek trusted Sloane. The chain was airtight. I tried to ask questions once casually about one of the forms I'd glimpsed. Sloane laughed softly. "It's complicated," she said, not unkindly. "But Paul understands it." My father nodded. That was that. Leo started noticing before I did. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked why Grandma and Grandpa kept whispering numbers in the kitchen. He said it the way children do, without accusation. Just curiosity. I asked what numbers. "Big ones," he said, "like when you talk about the house." The next morning, I found him sitting at the table with his math homework, while Sloane and my father murmured over documents nearby. He stared at his worksheet pencil, frozen, listening without understanding, absorbing tension he shouldn't have had to carry. I told him to go finish his work in his room. He didn't argue. I sensed danger the way you sense a structural flaw, not by collapse, but by strain. The beams still held. The walls were upright. But something was being redistributed incorrectly, load shifted where it didn't belong. The problem was, I had nothing concrete. Sloane was careful. Everything she said sounded legal, responsible, forward-looking. I couldn't point to a single lie, only the way she avoided clarity, the way she framed decisions as favors rather than risks. I brought it up to my mother once gently, asked if she knew exactly what Sloane was helping with. "She's helping your father plan," my mother said. "You know how much stress he's been under." That was the end of the conversation. At night, I lay awake replaying fragments. Sloane's smile, the urgency, the numbers Leo overheard, the way my father's tone changed when he talked about a reverend in a way it had never been with me. I felt like I was watching a system accept a new operator without verification. And I knew without proof, without evidence, that once control is handed over, it rarely comes back clean. The dinner that erased us didn't start with shouting. It started with preparation. My mother set the table with her good plates, the ones she only used on holidays or when appearances mattered. My father carved the roast slowly, methodically, like he was buying time. Derek arrived late as usual with Sloane at his side. She carried a bottle of wine and a folder tucked neatly under her arm as if both belonged. Leo sat beside me, shoulders tucked in knees pulled close to the chair. He'd sensed something before anyone spoke. Children always do. We hadn't even taken our first bite when my father cleared his throat. "Aaron," he said, not looking at me. "We need to talk about living arrangements." The words were calm, rehearsed. He finally met my eyes. "You can move to the basement, or you and the boy can leave by Friday." There it was. No warning, no discussion, no acknowledgement of the years that led to that sentence. I waited for someone to interrupt him, to soften it, to say it differently. No one did. Sloane leaned forward, folding her hands together like this was a board meeting. "This isn't personal," she said gently. "It's just what's best for the family unit right now. We need the space to move forward." "Family unit." Derek didn't bother with gentle. He smirked, glanced at Leo, then back at me. "Let's be honest," he said. "You and the kid are a financial drain." The word kid landed like a slap. I felt Leo flinch. He didn't look at Derek. He stared at his plate, jaw tight, trying to disappear into himself, the way he'd learned to do when adults made decisions over his head. I spoke then, not loudly, not angrily. I listed facts, numbers, mortgage payments, repairs, utilities, the fridge I'd bought, the roof I'd fixed. I reminded them quietly that I had been carrying this house long before Sloane ever set foot in it. My father waved his hand, cutting me off. "That's not the point, Janice." My mother said nothing. She stared down at her napkin, twisting it slowly between her fingers, like if she focused hard enough the moment might pass, without requiring her voice. I looked at her, waited. She didn't look up. Something broke then, not loudly, not all at once. It was the kind of break you feel more than hear. A line inside me that had been holding things together simply gave way. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. No one stopped me. Leo followed me upstairs without being told. That night, he packed his backpack in silence, clothes folded too carefully, school books stacked neatly. He didn't ask questions. He didn't cry. He moved with the efficiency of a child who understands that staying calm is safer than being heard. I watched him from the doorway, my chest tight. He paused once, holding a sweatshirt I'd bought him the winter before. "We're leaving, right?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded, zipped the bag and slung it over his shoulder like this was just another routine change. Like he hadn't just been told he didn't belong. Downstairs, laughter drifted up from the dining room. Plates clinked. Wine was poured. As I lay awake later staring at the ceiling, the truth finally settled into words I couldn't ignore. I wasn't being asked to leave. I was being written out. We didn't leave in the rush. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet, deliberate sorting of what was ours and what was never really meant to be. I took only what I'd paid for. The television in the living room. The couch I'd bought 2 years earlier when the old one finally collapsed. The small desk Leo did his homework on. I unplugged things carefully, coiling cords, wiping dust, moving through the house like a guest checking out early. No one tried to stop me. Derek watched from the doorway, once amused, shaking his head as if I were being dramatic. Leo didn't say a word. He carried boxes that were almost too heavy for him, adjusting his grip without asking for help. When one slipped, he picked it up again, his face set, determined not to draw attention. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to do this, that it wasn't his job. But something told me he needed to feel useful, needed to move with purpose in a moment that had taken so much control away from him. We loaded the car until the trunk wouldn't close all the way. I left behind the rest furniture I'd fixed, but hadn't paid for walls I'd painted, but didn't own. I didn't look back when we drove away. The house shrank in the rearview mirror, a familiar shape that no longer had a claim on us. The apartment was temporary. A one-bedroom above a hardware store that had gone out of business years earlier, the sign still hanging crooked over the door. The stairs smelled like dust and old paint. The heat worked when it felt like it. The windows rattled at night. It was enough. Megan found it for us. She worked in the same office as I did, a project coordinator with 2 kids of her own, and a way of listening that didn't require explanations. When I told her we needed something fast and close to Leo's school, she didn't ask why. She sent listings, made calls, showed up with a tape measure, and a notebook like this was just another problem to solve. She helped me transfer Leo's school paperwork, coordinated bus routes, talked to the registrar so I wouldn't have to explain our situation more times than necessary. She did it quietly, efficiently, without turning our disruption into a story. The first night in the apartment, we sat on the floor and ate takeout from cartons, balanced on the coffee table I'd barely managed to carry upstairs. The TV leaned against the wall unplugged. Boxes surrounded us like evidence of a life mid-assembly. Leo picked at his food, then looked up at me. "Are we poor now?" he asked. There was no fear in his voice, just curiosity, like he was trying to understand a new equation. I thought about the bank account I still had, the paycheck that would come in on Friday, the budget I'd already redrawn in my head. We weren't poor in the way the word usually meant. "No," I said carefully. "We're okay." He nodded, accepting that answer the way children do when they sense the truth is more complicated than the words. Later, after he fell asleep on a mattress on the floor, I sat alone in the quiet. The city hummed faintly through the window. A train passed somewhere in the distance. I realized then that the cost of leaving hadn't been financial. I could recover from that, rebuild, adjust. What I couldn't afford anymore was teaching my son that dignity was negotiable, that belonging meant shrinking, that staying meant accepting erasure. Watching him carry those boxes silent and steady, I understood that every decision from that night forward would teach him something about worth, about boundaries, about when to walk away. And for the first time since the dinner, the weight on my chest shifted. We had left with less, but we had kept the most important thing. The first crack didn't come with a phone call or a confrontation. It came quietly through my inbox. A property tax notice arrived one morning while I was at work, flagged as overdue. At first, I assumed it was a delay, some automated lag in the county system. Then another came a week later. And another. Different amounts, different dates, all tied to the same address I no longer lived at. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My name was still listed as a secondary contact. I'd never asked to be removed. No one had thought to change it. Part of me wondered if that was intentional. Another part knew it was more likely neglect. During my lunch break, I stepped outside and called the county office. The woman on the line sounded tired but efficient. She confirmed the arrears, then paused when I asked about recent changes to the account. I could hear her typing. "There's a lien," she said. I asked her to repeat it. "A secondary lien was filed last month," she clarified. "It's not from the county. It's private." My stomach tightened. "By who?" She hesitated, then read the name carefully. "The intermediary listed is Sloan Whitlock." The sound of traffic around me faded. I leaned against the brick wall behind the building, grounding myself in the rough texture, forcing my breathing to slow. A lien meant debt. It meant the house had been leveraged, quietly, legally, without my knowledge. I asked a few more questions. She answered what she could. The lien had been filed properly, documents signed, everything in order on paper. If payments were missed, the lender could move quickly. I thanked her and ended the call. For a long moment, I stood there, phone in my hand, feeling the shape of the truth settle into place. The urgency, the paperwork, the pressure language. It hadn't been planning. It had been positioning. I called my father that night. He didn't sound surprised. Annoyed maybe, defensive. But not surprised. Sloan explained all that he said. It's temporary. Strategic. I reminded him calmly that I'd warned him something felt off, that I'd asked questions he'd brushed aside. "You're overthinking it," he replied. "You always do." The line went dead before I could say anything else. I sat in the dark apartment afterward, Leo asleep in the next room, and replayed every dismissed concern, every conversation cut short. I thought about how quickly they'd trusted Sloane's confidence over my caution. How easily my warnings had been labeled negativity. They trusted a stranger with their house, but not me with a voice. That sentence formed fully complete and undeniable. It didn't come with anger, just clarity. The next day I called back and requested copies of the filings. Public records were public for a reason. I printed everything out at work, spreading the pages across my desk like a puzzle. Dates, amounts, signatures. My father's name appeared again and again. Derek's too. Sloane's signature threaded through all of it, neat and assured. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. Instead, I watched, listened, took notes. At home, Leo worked on a science project at the kitchen counter while I read through documents on my laptop. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was making sure things were okay. He nodded, trusting me the way children do when they believe adults will handle what needs handling. That trust sat heavy in my chest. I realized then that whatever happened next, I wouldn't be able to fix it for them. Not fully. They had made decisions without me about assets I'd helped protect in ways that shut me out completely. But I could make sure my son understood something different. That being careful isn't the same as being afraid. That asking questions isn't betrayal. And that sometimes the first crack is the only warning you're going to get before everything starts to break. I didn't go looking for proof with anger. I went looking for it with precision. Tom Alvarez called me back 2 days after I left him a message. He worked in county housing compliance, the kind of job that didn't make headlines, but touched everything quietly. We'd crossed paths years earlier on an infrastructure project, and when he heard my name, his tone shifted from polite to cautious. We met in his office after hours. He closed the door, lowered his voice, and spread a thin stack of documents across the table. There's been irregular refinancing, he said, first tapping a page with his pen. Multiple valuations, all higher than market. Too high. I leaned forward. The numbers didn't make sense. Comparable properties didn't support them. The appraisals were aggressive, optimistic to the point of fiction. Who ordered these, I asked. Tom didn't hesitate. Through an intermediary, Sloane Whitlock. He flipped to the next page. Wire transfers, dates, amounts, accounts that didn't belong to my parents. Unauthorized fund movements, he continued. Savings shifted out in pieces, just small enough not to trigger alarms right away. My chest tightened. My parents' retirement account, something I'd tried to protect, something I'd assumed was off limits, had been bled quietly. Sloane's name appeared again, not as a recipient directly, but as a beneficiary through layered entities. Clean on the surface, obscured by design. Derek's signature was everywhere. He signed without reading, Tom said almost apologetic. Every time. The house, the one I'd patched paid for, stabilized, had been used as collateral for ventures that had nothing to do with it. Short-term financing, risky investments, deals Derek didn't understand, and Sloane framed as opportunities. I felt something settle in my chest then. Not rage, resolve. Tom leaned back. I can't tell you what to do, he said. But if this goes where I think it's going, investigators will ask questions. And documentation matters. I asked him what kind. Everything, he said. Dates, conversations, anything you can legally record. I checked the laws that night. One-party consent. I was allowed. So I started recording. Phone calls, voicemails, conversations where Sloane spoke too freely, confident that I was already irrelevant. I asked questions that sounded naive. Let her explain things in her own words. Let Derek talk over details he didn't understand. Each recording felt heavier than the last. At home, Leo worked quietly at the table while I listened through headphones, transcribing snippets, organizing files. He didn't ask what I was doing. He didn't need to. He just knew I was focused in a way that meant something mattered. This wasn't about proving I was right. It wasn't about getting back at anyone. Somewhere between Tom's office and my kitchen table, the shape of the situation changed. The house was already compromised. The money was already gone. Confrontation wouldn't reverse any of that. But Leo's future, his sense of safety, his understanding of fairness, the example I set that was still intact. I wasn't going to teach him that silence was noble when harm was happening, or that protecting yourself meant burning everything down in anger. I was going to show him something quieter. That responsibility means paying attention. That love doesn't require self-erasure. And that when systems are abused, documenting the truth is sometimes the only way to stop the damage from spreading. Late one night after Leo had gone to bed, I closed my laptop and sat in the dark apartment, the recordings backed up in 3 places. The hum of the city drifted in through the window. I understood then that whatever came next, I wouldn't be stepping in as the fixer anymore. I'd be standing as a witness. And for my son, that mattered more than revenge ever could. The collapse didn't announce itself with headlines or sirens. It arrived through interruption. I was reviewing a site report at my desk when my phone started vibrating repeatedly. Missed calls, voicemails stacking on top of each other. Unknown numbers, then my mother's name, then my father's. By the time I stepped outside to listen, the tone had already shifted from confusion to fear. 2 investigators had come to the house that morning. Not in uniform, not dramatic, just calm, methodical, carrying folders thick enough to change the air in a room. They asked for Sloane first. When my parents said she wasn't there, they asked when she'd last been seen. No one had an answer. Accounts were frozen before lunch, my father's checking. The savings I'd once monitored quietly from a distance. Even the small emergency fund my mother kept tucked away just in case. The lien had escalated. The lender wanted answers. The county wanted documentation. The system once nudged was now fully awake. Sloane didn't call. She didn't text. Her number went straight to voicemail. Her email bounced back. By the end of the day, Derek realized she hadn't just stepped out. She was gone. He unraveled fast. He called me first, his voice tight, breathless, asking if I'd heard from her. I told him no. He cursed, blamed the investigators. Blamed bad timing, blamed everything except the signatures that bore his name. Then my parents called. My mother's voice shook as she spoke. "Aaron, we need you to come back," she said. "Just for a little while. We don't understand what's happening." My father took the phone. His tone was different now, smaller. "We need your help," he said. "You always know how to fix these things. Fix it." The phrase settled heavily between us. I didn't answer right away. I sat on the edge of the bed, in the apartment, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my parents describe chaos I had warned them about months earlier. Papers everywhere. Calls they didn't understand. Deadlines they couldn't meet. Leo was at the table behind me, working on a history assignment. He wasn't trying to listen. He didn't have to. The words carried. When I hung up, another voicemail came through. My father again. His voice cracked this time. He said they might lose the house. He asked if I could move back, just temporarily, just until things stabilized. Leo looked up at me. "Are Grandma and Grandpa okay?" he asked. I didn't lie. "They're scared," I said. He nodded, absorbing that quietly. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are we going back?" I closed my eyes. In that moment, everything I'd carried for years, every repair, every payment, every swallowed frustration rose up together, not as anger, but as clarity. I wasn't being asked to help. I was being asked to erase myself again, to step back into a role that required silent sacrifice and no protection in return. I thought about the dinner, the ultimatum, the way Leo had packed his backpack without a word, the way my parents had trusted Sloane's confidence over my caution. I called my father back. "No," I said. The word felt steady, final. "I can't come back," I continued, "and I can't fix this for you." He started to protest. I stopped him. "I won't teach my son that love means erasing yourself." The line went quiet. After I hung up, the Leo didn't say anything. He just slid his chair back, came over, and leaned against me. I put my arm around him and felt his weight settle in, solid and real. Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed. A train horn sounded in the distance. Whatever was happening back at that house would unfold without me. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt about that. The house went into foreclosure quietly, the way most things end when no one is left to argue for them. A notice arrived in the mail 2 months after the accounts were frozen. Not addressed to me, but forwarded by mistake, my name still lingering in systems no one had bothered to update. The language was clinical: deadlines, outstanding balances, a final date circled in ink by someone who had no emotional stake in what those walls had once meant. My parents moved into a rental on the edge of town, a small place with thin walls and unreliable heat. They sold what they could before the bank took the rest. My father started driving delivery routes in the mornings. My mother cleaned offices at night. They didn't call as often after that. When they did, the conversations stayed on the surface. Weather, appointments, logistics. We didn't talk about the house. Derek worked temporary labor when he could find it. Warehouse shifts, construction cleanup, anything that paid by the hour. The confidence that once filled every room he entered had drained out of him completely. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he still talked about Sloan, sometimes as if she might come back and explain everything. She never did. I didn't check. My life narrowed in a different direction. The custody schedule stayed intact, predictable, grounded. Leo spent his weekdays with me, his weekends balanced between routines that no longer felt fragile. His new school took some adjusting at first, but within weeks, he found his rhythm, joined a science club, brought home papers covered in careful handwriting, confidence slowly returning to his posture. One afternoon, he came home excited about a presentation he'd volunteered for. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. I watched that change with quiet relief. At work, the promotion came through without ceremony. A meeting, a handshake, an updated title on an email signature. It meant more responsibility, longer hours, but also recognition that didn't require me to disappear in order to earn it. Stability settled in slowly. Rent paid on time, groceries planned, evenings spent at the table with Leo talking about his day, listening to mine. The apartment never felt like a step down. It felt like a line drawn. My parents sent a letter once. Apologies layered over regret, written carefully as if the right phrasing could rewind time. I read it. I didn't respond. That wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Late one night after Leo had gone to bed, I stood by the window and looked out over the quiet street. The city lights reflected back faintly, imperfect, steady. I thought about the house I'd left behind, the one I'd maintained, protected, financed. I thought about how easily it had been leveraged, without my consent, and how quickly I'd been removed once I no longer fit the story they wanted to tell themselves. I didn't feel lost the way I'd expected to. I felt closure. I hadn't lost a home. I had ended a cycle where sacrifice went unnoticed, where responsibility was mistaken for availability, where love was conditional on silence. Breaking it hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't required confrontation or revenge. It had required one clear refusal and the willingness to live with the consequences. Watching Leo sleep peacefully in the next room, I knew that choice would shape him more than any house ever could. He would grow up knowing that boundaries aren't abandonment, that self-respect isn't selfish, that leaving can sometimes be an act of care. The world didn't correct itself after that. Things didn't magically improve for everyone involved. But for the first time, the direction of my life belonged fully to me and to my son. And that was enough.